everybody, JK here from Animator Island. Welcome to today's live stream. Today we're going to be talking about eyes. How's it going? And I hope you'll enjoy the lecture that is prepared and then some analysis and application that we'll jump into after that. And as usual with these live streams, we will follow that up with a Q&A session. So if you have any questions or comments or whatever you'd like, you could go ahead and type stuff into the chat and I'll keep an eye on that as well. Happy Monday morning to you, or Monday, whatever time of day it is there where you are. Just for everyone's information's sake, if this is your first live stream or you're watching the recording, I tend to do a weekly live stream here at Animator Island on Mondays at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So that is what time it is right here, right now, where I am. And if you'd like to join in on one of the live streams and watch it live, if you're not doing that right now, you can hang out with us here at Animator Island TV on Mondays at 10 a.m. Eastern time. All right. What else do we have to talk about before we jump in? Anything. Also, kind of for those who aren't around every time and need to know what we're doing here. My name is JK. I am one of the founders of Animator Island, along with Ferdinand, who you may be familiar with from a lot of the other live streams and videos. In fact, he recently posted a brand new video on animating in Photoshop, I believe, just the other day. So check that out if you haven't yet. But these videos on Mondays at 10 a.m. Eastern are dedicated to my attempt to change my own art style. So I've been doing art for many, many years. So about a little over 30, probably at this point, professionally for maybe 20, 25. And I previously had a very particular art style, which I would describe as newspaper comic style. It's very simple, very graphic, very story-based, because the art was just there to either tell the jokes or to tell some sort of story. So after those 30 years of practicing that one particular style, I decided it was time to change some things. I'm no longer doing newspaper comics, so it was time to kind of evolve my art. And I decided that because I had lost a lot of the passion that I had for art, if I had any to begin with, I wanted to go in a direction that was intentional, right? I wanted to shape my own art style in a way that suited my, I guess, likes and dislikes a little bit. I think intentionality is really the word for it. I wanted to make it something that was very intentional. I didn't want to leave it up to chance. I didn't want to leave it up to just the time, because honestly, your art style will develop in time if you just keep practicing. But what you practice will dramatically influence what your art style ends up looking like and what it evolves into. So I wanted to intentionally push in a certain direction, if that's even possible. I'm still trying to determine if that's possible. I think it is. I might still have some leftover elements from my old art style for the rest of my life, because that's just how life works. But in the meantime, I want to try and push it in a certain direction. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about eyes. And let me share my iPad real quick with you. The hope is that we'll get through everything today. Everything will be fine. And but I will give you advance warning that my iPad is not fully charged today. I thought I had more time this morning, and it just did not charge quickly. So hopefully the battery will last on it. But if not, then we'll make it work. It'll all be fine. All right. So we've got our we'll jump into our lecture here, and let me do the little video tag on the lecture. Okay, there it is. So we're going to start out today with a bit of a lecture, but what I want to stress is that this isn't going to be a hardcore anatomy lesson. We're going to talk a little bit about the parts of the eyes, but this is much more application than it is theory. The reason that we're doing that, much like we just did with the last live stream on color, is because there's already so many amazing resources out there for you. We'll touch on a couple of those in today's lecture, but I don't need to go into it again. If you want to learn about the anatomy of an eye, and you should, because this is important stuff, then there are so many resources that you can find that deal with that sort of thing. So we're going to kind of skip over a little bit of that this morning, and we're going to talk about more of the detail of application and really getting in and drawing things and trying to figure that stuff out. Because I think that that's really useful stuff, and I think that that's maybe talked about a little bit less, not completely less, but a little bit less than the anatomy and the hardcore studies of eyes. Now, I think it's really wise to do hardcore studies of eyes, or really hardcore studies of almost anything that you want to draw, because when you know what is real, you know the truth of it all, you can then simplify it in beautiful ways, which we're going to talk a lot about. So definitely recommend that you check that out. Check out other resources and things, but at the same time, know that we're not going to really be covering that today. All right. So I had that, and we'll get into it. So when it comes to eyes in art and animation, you will note that every artist does eyes a little bit differently, and it's actually one of the signatures of an artist, especially a character artist. It's not necessarily, if you're a landscape artist, you're probably not drawing a lot of eyes, but if you are a character artist or a character animator, then chances are good that you will have a signature style for eyes. And people, if you do enough art and you become well known enough, people will be able to tell what your art is just based on your default art style of eyes. Typically, human beings look at eyes first. If there's an image that has a character's eyes in it, they'll be drawn to their eyes, because as human beings, that's what we're drawn to in reality too. When you're talking with somebody or when you meet someone, you tend to be drawn to their eyes. And so that's just kind of the nature of things. Maria says, hi, all, working remote, so in and out of the discussion today. Hey, Maria, good to have you. Hope that the remote work is going well, and I'm glad you could stop by whenever you're in and out. So definitely glad to see you and everybody here today. So, all right. So every artist is going to have a particular style for eyes, and that may change. And you can always go beyond your own style. Like you can do different things. Nobody's saying that you always have to draw eyes a very specific way, but typically speaking, you're going to have a certain default, right? And that's what we're talking about when I talk about trying to change my art style. I'm trying to change my default style. Doesn't mean that I can't go back and do newspaper comics in the future. I just don't want that to be what appears instantly every time I draw. So as an example, if I was going to draw just as a default eyes, my eyes that I would draw would look like this. Okay. And then we put, a little nose on there and a smiley face, and we could finish out the face or whatever. But those would be the default eyes that I would draw, because that's what I practiced for so long. And that's not the set of eyes that I want to draw going forward as my default style. This is very symbolic, and it's very, I don't want to say basic, but it's very simplified, right? It's very, very simplified. And so I want to add a little more complexity as I go forward. So let's talk about a few different ways that we can draw eyes and look at eyes and construct eyes. Fortran says hello. Hey, Fortran. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping by the chat and the live stream. Okay, so first up in the upper left corner here, we have a very iconic character, Snoopy. Snoopy from Peanuts. And most people in the world know Snoopy. If you don't know Snoopy, you should check out Peanuts comics. But Snoopy, if you look at his eyes, has 2 dots for eyes, and that's it. And that's what you could do with art, right? You could simplify down to its barest form. And in this case, we have 2 dots. Now, there's something that I want to talk about related to the 2 dots of Snoopy's eyes. If we look closely, you'll see that they're not circles. They're actually more elongated ovals, and they're slightly tilted. And that's a really good thing to note, because if you are going to do just dots for eyes, you will be able to increase the amount of expression, and you will be able to increase the audience's understanding of where that character is looking, including, I think, appeal, by slightly altering just flat out circles. So if we had a character with just dots for eyes, which is doable, I mean, we could do that, it's going to tend to be less expressive and less appealing as if we do this a similar thing, but we have the eyes be slightly elongated ovals like Snoopy here. So this first example where it's just circles is not going to be typically as expressive as if we use the second option that we have here. And then as you noted, or as I just noted on Snoopy here, that the eyes are actually angled slightly. And so that will add an additional element if we can tilt those ovals slightly. And there's actually an Animator Island article, I'm pretty sure, on tilt. So you can check that out at animatorisland.com. It doesn't necessarily deal directly with eyes, but it's that sort of same principle, where if you can add tilts into your work, you're going to increase the intrinsic appeal and interest of whatever it is that you're creating. So if we're going to go with dots for eyes, these are our three kind of options for us. And as we see here, a Snoopy, when we can elongate those ovals and tilt them slightly, we can get a lot more expression and a lot more interest out of those eyes. So that's kind of our first option and first attempt here. And then if we move over to the right, we'll see my beloved Foxtrot. If you've watched previous live streams, you know that this is what I based my previous style on. When I was young, I loved this comic series. And so these are the kind of eyes that I learned to draw. They are circles with dots, very simplified eye, but it reads, you know what it is. You can tell what's happening there. And so this would be my current default style, which I'm trying to kind of move beyond, but it works. And for the purpose of newspaper comics or, certain types of art, this will work really well. And it's easier to pull off in a sense. It's still tricky to pull off because you need to be able to do it well. If you use this style, right, and you kind of don't put the dots in the right place, the character's going to look weird and not right. Or if you put the dots in a place that's not quite as I don't want to say correct, but not quite as it's not quite as accurate for what you're trying to do, then it's not going to be give you the same appeal, and it's not going to give you the same feel and the same understanding for your audience, right? So it's not to say that, oh, you just do this eye because it's easy. I would say it's easier in some ways, but anytime you simplify anything, there's also a challenging element to it because you have less to hide behind, right? You don't have a lot of fluff that you can kind of just gloss over. And so to do this sort of eye well is trickier because you only have two things to work with. You've got the circle and you've got the dot, and that's it. So you better make sure that you nail it. And in that case, Foxtrot, he almost always nails it. Okay, then we move down to the left corner here. We see something that you might express more of as an anime-like eye, right? We're getting more complex now. And typically in an anime style, although there's a very broad range, this is more what you're going to get. You're going to get more complexity. You're going to get more effects. You're going to get things like that. And so this would be the next step in the range of eyes that we're looking at today. And then finally, we would go on to a hyper-realistic eye, right? This is where, with a pencil, they were working very hard to try and recreate reality. And so it may have some tweaks of artistic elements, but we're leaning so heavily into reality at this point that we're not talking about simplification anymore. We're not talking about trying to change what actually is. You're trying to capture exactly what actually is. And so in this first slide, what we're talking about is kind of the range that we have when it comes to eyes as artists. What we can do, we can go all the way from dots to something that is hyper realistic. So what is the right or the best option for us? Well, I don't know. That's a very personal question. That's something that you have to decide as an artist. What do you want your eyes to look like when you do art? That's something that you have to decide. Now, for much of my career, as I mentioned, I was doing things in this Foxtrot style. And so that's what I wanted my eyes to look like. It's no longer the case. That's not what I want my eyes to look like as a default. And then the other thing that I would mention is that this Snoopy style, this kind of just dots, is something that really appeals to me and I really enjoy. So going forward, I'm still going to do eyes that are just elongated ovals for some characters and some pieces. I'm not saying that I can never do this again. What I'm trying to do is to move to something else as my default, as I keep saying, that I want to have going forward. So if you've played the game Mythic Ranch Card Battles, which is the Weekend Panda mobile game that I worked on with my wife, most of the characters are going to have an eye style that's much more simplified, like these top two things. And we're still making Mythic Ranch games. So it's not like I'm going to stop doing that kind of art. It just means that I'm going to also try and push my style beyond it in other pieces and in other illustrations and animations and things like that. Now, for me, again, this is going to be a very personal thing, but I'm just going to share. For me, I also don't really want to go with this hyper realism style. That's just not. It doesn't do anything for me. Hyper realism for me, it's very interesting in the sense that it takes a lot of skill to pull off and a lot of patience. Usually, it doesn't. Maybe it. I mean, you can get away with very little skill as long as you have enough time to do hyper realism, but I just don't. It doesn't do anything for me. Like I'm just not interested in it. There's a famous quote, and forgive me, I can't remember who said it. It was maybe Steven Spielberg or Tim Burton, or I'm pretty sure it was a director. And they said, if you're going to do animation, you should make something that only animation can do. And so what essentially they were saying is, if you could get by doing live action film, then go do the live action film. There's no reason to animate it, right? And we see this a lot, and thankfully we're kind of moving away from it. But we saw this a lot, especially in the early 2000s. People were trying desperately to get this hyper realism in animation, and it was like, why? I understand the challenge of it, the interest of that end of things. Can we do this? But it's not. It's kind of boring. Like you have this almost infinite possibilities in animation that you could do. Use that infinite possibilities. If you want to just go hyper realistic, go take a picture or video, because it already exists. It's there. And so I think one of the things that art and animation can really do for us is it can just boost things to new places that we can't just walk out our front door and see. And so I really appreciated that quote by that director. I think it was a director, because it always appealed to me, this idea that if you're going to do animation, then use animation to its fullest. Like do stuff that you can't do in reality, because it's going to be more interesting than if you're just trying to copy things one for one. Now that being said, it really pays for you to do some hyper realistic eye studies or realistic studies of anything, because as I said earlier, when you know it well, you can simplify it after the fact. And so I'll continue to do studies, realistic studies of all these sorts of things, because it's very good for you as an artist, so that you can then uh, bend things and twist things and move stuff around and simplify, and then it will improve your art overall to have that sort of foundation. It's not always fun, at least not for me. I don't really like doing hard studies, but it's good for you, so we do it anyway. And so for me, then that leaves kind of this lower left corner of this anime-ish eyes. The challenge there is I don't want to do anime. Those days for me are done as well. I did a lot of anime drawing in college. I wanted to, at that point, have that style, but I've kind of grown past that, and I'm like, that doesn't do it for me anymore. I still enjoy looking at anime, watching anime, manga, stuff like that. A lot of the images that I've saved to my personal art gallery from the internet are in an anime style, because there's a lot of great anime art out there, but it's not what I want to do. So that leaves me stuck in this place where none of these four things that I've put out here are exactly what I'm looking for. And as we move on in a bit into the analysis portion of our live stream today, we'll see that none of the images that I've pulled from are exactly what I want to do. They all just lend themselves an element to what it is that I want to do, because essentially looking for this signature eye that will be unique to me and will be everything that I'm hoping it will be. But that means that I'm going to have to pull from a lot of different resources, and I'm going to have to keep pushing things in different directions because I can't find anything that I'm like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. Whereas in the old days with Foxtrot, it was, oh, no, that's exactly what I want to do. If I could draw exactly like Foxtrot, I would be happy. And so that's what I tried to accomplish. But now nothing that I've found is exactly what I want to do. So I have to kind of invent it for myself. And that's an interesting and exciting process, right? And I think that's one of the things that you can really grow as an artist and a person if you're striving to find that new ground, go where no man has gone before. If there's an excitement there, there's this exploration and discovery, and so that's restored a lot of the passion that I lost for a while. All right, so we're not going to go into heavy anatomy, and we're not, but we're going to talk a little bit about the eye just briefly so that we're all on the same page, because these are little tips that are really, really useful to know. So if we start here with this first image that I found, we have the different parts of the eye. And so what you there are I will say that there are three main parts of the eye. You might be able to simplify it down to two, to be honest, but we're going to go with three for now. And that would be, well, we'll just do more of a circle. That would be this sclera, which is the white of the eye, or the off-white of the eye, as it were, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then you have the iris, which is generally speaking the colorful part of the eye, right? It's the bit on the exterior of the pupil that's where we see the color. In this case, this image, we have this kind of greenish gray, blue, with a little hints of copper in there too. So it's very, very cool looking eye there. But you have the iris, and then you have the pupil that goes inside the iris, or sort of goes inside the iris. It is located in the center of the iris. And so these would be kind of the three main parts of the eye. Now, you could get rid of the iris entirely, as we discussed with Foxtrot style, and just go pupil and sclera, and or white of the eye. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I can never get that one fully correct. Anyway, so you could simplify it down to that, but I would go with three typically. And Maria makes a good point here. It says you can get a lot of characterization by playing with a ratio of sclera to iris, and that is accurate. Or sclera to pupil if you want to avoid the iris entirely, things like that. And that is super, super accurate. This is a terrific point, and we're going to get into that a lot in the analysis portion of today's live stream, because we're going to look at examples of where the ratio is drastically different. And it's true. You could change a character almost entirely by playing with this ratio. That is a terrific point, and I appreciate you bringing it up, Marita. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we have those three base elements of the eye, and then we have kind of some secondary elements in a sense. The secondary elements would be things like the highlight, which almost every eye is going to have. You can leave it out. There's nothing to say that you have to put a highlight in, but typically an eye is going to have a highlight because there's going to be a light source. And unless that light source is so soft that it's just not really giving you a solid highlight, typically there's going to be a highlight. And so that would be an additional part of the eye. You're also going to have some shadows, because the other two secondary elements are the eyelids and the eyelashes. And the reason I call them secondary elements is because they're not necessarily the eye itself, but they're essential in a way to the eye, especially when we're talking about expression. A lot of our expression when we're drawing especially comes in how the eyelids are situated and how we do them. So the eyelids tend to be a secondary element that's very important to the eye, even if it's not necessarily, say, the primary element. I will touch very briefly, but only very briefly, on this image of the eyeball itself. It really is very wise to remember that the eyeball is a ball. And when we're drawing, especially in 2D, it's a little easier in a sense in 3D because it's going to be a sphere. But in 2D, it really pays for us to remember that that's the case. The eye is a ball. It's not exactly a sphere. I mean, it's spherical, but as you see in this image here, we have kind of a bubble at the front part of our eye, around the iris area and around the pupil that disforms it a little bit. But you don't really need to know that because typically you're not going to zoom in enough to see anything like that, and it's highly glossy and it's just kind of, but it feels spherical. So keep in mind that the eye is spherical, especially when you're putting on things like the eyelids, because typically an eyelid's not going to be straight unless you're stylizing. It's going to have a bit of a curvature to it because it's wrapped around the eye. The eye sits back into the skull. The last thing that I will note before we move on from the kind of anatomy stuff is, do keep in mind that the pupil is actually a hole, right? It's not a thing. It's a lack of a thing. The pupil is a hole in your eye that lets the light in. And the reason it appears black is because once the light goes in, it gets absorbed by the tissue behind. And so it's like entirely shadow, and it just kind of sucks up the light like a black hole. So the pupil, and one of the reasons that the pupil sometimes looks bigger and sometimes looks smaller in the iris is because it's dilated to the point where it's either taking in more light or it's trying to reduce the amount of light so as not to make you blind. So if you stare at the sun, which I don't recommend you do, the pupil will get much smaller so that you're not blind, or it's doing its best to stop you from becoming blind. Plus, but I mean, contrast that with if you're in a very dark room, the pupil will get larger, the hole will grow larger so that it lets in more light so that you can see. So something to keep in mind. I think it's an interesting thing that the pupil is a hole. If you're doing a highly realistic study or you just want to stylize, you can actually add a bit of highlight along the rim of that hole, and it'll pop the pupil in it sounds terrible, but it will make the image pop in a really interesting way. All right, so if we go down here to this next image at the bottom here, this is from Stan Prokopenko over at proko.com. If you've seen the video on good artists and good teachers, he is on that list. So I definitely recommend you go check out some of his tutorials, especially when it's related to things like anatomy in the eye. He goes into a lot of depth that I'm not going to do today, but I wanted to pull this image because I find that it's fascinating, and it's also something that sometimes we forget as artists. The eyelids have depth, right? They are not just flat nothings. They actually have some depth there. And so this image on the left here showcases that well. There are planes along the bottom and along the edges of the eyelids, right? And typically speaking, the plane of the top eyelid is going to be in shadow because generally speaking, light's going to come from above us. And typically speaking, the bottom plane, the plane of the bottom eyelid is going to have a highlight. And this is something that you can really play with nicely in your art if you're interested in getting a little bit more dimensional quality, or getting something that is just more visually interesting. It's going to appeal to the audience if you do it well, because it's not something that everybody adds. Maria mentions Proko does a lovely perspective studies. I have trouble applying what he shows, but he does wonderful work nonetheless. I think he's one of the best teachers that's around on YouTube. There's a handful of really good ones, but I think that he does a tremendous job walking you through bits, and it's also entertaining along the way, which is useful because sometimes things can be so dry that you're like, oh, just get on with it. Anyway, definitely recommend checking that out. So what I wanted to discuss regarding this whole planes of the eyelid is if you see people drawing an eye kind of like this one I did above in advance, you'll see that this top line, which let me draw it next to it so that we can see in action. this top line tends to be kind of thicker and darker, right? And that's representative of this plane of the eyelid and the shadow. So using just line and thickness of line, we can showcase this sort of concept without actually drawing in, as it is down here, without drawing in that definitive plane. Now you can draw in the definitive plane, but if you want to, if you've ever wondered why people tend to make the upper part of the eye thicker in line, this is why, because it's representative of that sort of shadow and of that plane. And it also tends to be representative of the eyelashes, of which we have more on our top lids typically than we do on our bottom lids. And so then at the bottom of an eye that we draw, the line tends to be lighter because it's more representative of that highlight that happens on the bottom plane. So that's just, I always found that that was an interesting thing, because for a long time I copied eyes and I was just like, oh, you make the top line darker. But I never questioned why for a long time. And then as I was doing analysis, I was like, oh, I see. The reason that so many people do that, the reason that it has become a default, is because of this real world anatomy that we have, the thickness of the eyelid and also the eyelashes. So I found that interesting. I thought I would bring that up and along. Okay, so that kind of talks about that a bit. And we're going to kind of jump over then into the analysis and application portion of our lecture. But before we do, I did want to make one note that Ferdinand has put together a series on eyes over at Animator Island. It was done a long time ago, but it's still really quality information. So if you're interested in checking out his tutorials and his analysis on eyes that goes into a little more depth, and it talks a lot about it, eyes and animation specifically, I definitely recommend that. You can do that in 2 ways. You can either, oh, Cool Gaming just subscribed. Thanks, Cool Gaming. Glad to have you here. You can either go to animatorisland.com and click the little search magnifier box in the corner right here, and search for eyes or making eyes that see or something like that, and it'll pop up with the whole series. Or if you want to wait until after the live stream today, or if you're watching it recorded, you can check the description in the YouTube video description box, and I will post a link to that article or that series of articles. It's a whole series, so it's definitely worth checking out. Cool beans. All right, now we can move along to our analysis of eyes, which we will go here. Here we go. All right, and let me pull up our little fun text box. There we go. Application analyzing for Reiki style. All right, so as we're jumping in here, I've done something a little bit different today than I think we have in the past. I've put together 2 sets of images, one which is not what I want to do for my own personal eyes, and one of which is closer to what I want to do. But as I said before, nothing is going to be exactly what I'm hoping for, which is why we have to kind of analyze and develop whatever it is that I'm hoping my own personal eye style will be. So as I mentioned in the past, and as I think I mentioned earlier, it's important to note here that as we move into the analysis portion, I am talking about something extremely personal at this point. This is my style. This is what I'm trying to develop. This is not general rules and guidelines. If you want to create something along the lines of whatever my style ends up being, then maybe these rules apply to you, or these analysis apply to you. But it's not general broad rules. You might see all of the eyes on this nose screen and think, oh, I like all of those. I want to do like that. So by all means, do it like that. This is just not what I want to shoot for personally. And so it's just, I think, really important that as we enter this next portion of the live stream, we recognize that we have transitioned from general rules and ideas that apply to all artists to something that is extremely specific to me. And I'm appreciative that you guys are coming along for this exploration that I'm doing for my own art style. Okay, So let's go through these briefly and kind of quickly, and we'll talk about the elements to each of them that I'm not interested in, that I don't want to apply to my own default style. And let me grab a drink before I do that. Okay, so if we look at this first one here, the reason that I grabbed this one to put in the no category is because the eyes, the irises tend to be more complicated than I'm looking for. These irises are closer to a more realistic style because they have added a lot more depth, a lot more gradient, a lot more line work inside the iris itself. That's just not what I'm looking to do. There's excess of highlights and things too. There's this kind of sparkle and bling and effects, and it's just a little too over the top for me. It's not what I'm looking to accomplish. So that's why that one kind of made the list. The second one down is again, kind of hyper realistic eye. This is, these are eyes from the portrait that we have in the John Singer Sargent piece that was showcased in the recent Animator Island video on growing your audience. It was talking about quality of art. There's a lot of quality in these eyes, the second one here. But it's not what I want to do. I'm not looking for this hyper realism in my own work. So that's why this one made the list. This next one down, we kind of have a little bit of that first one going on here. We have this element of not over complexity, but it's more complex than I'm really looking for. It's a little too much, especially around the exterior. Like there's so much in terms of like the bottom eyelashes and including highlights on the eyelashes themselves. And there's just a lot. It's very intense. It's very graphic. It's very nice. I like looking at this piece that these eyes are attached to, but it's not what I want to do. So it's something for me to keep in mind. I don't want to go overly complicated or overly realistic. If we move down to the next one here, as Maria mentioned earlier, you get a lot of different character elements, characterization by playing with the ratio of iris to whites of the eye. But you also get a lot of characterization by playing with the pupil size to iris size. And that's what's happening here. We have a very small pupil that is actually a elongated oval, which is nice. I mean, I'm not against the elongated oval there, but we have the ratio here between iris and pupil is not what I'm looking for. I don't want to do giant pupil and tiny iris. That's just not, I'm not looking to do that in my own art. Once again, I'll try and stop reiterating the same point. It's not to say that I don't like this style of eye. It's just not what I want from my own default style. Okay, next up we have just dots like Snoopy, right? I enjoy this. I really like doing these sorts of eyes because they can be simplistic and expressive in a way that creates a certain level of charm and appeal. And so I'm going to end up doing this a lot because I'm still working on Mythic Ranch games, and there's going to be a lot of this sort of eye in the creatures of those games. But this isn't what I want my default style to be. So that one's an easy one. I'm ruling it out because there's no white to the eye. There's just dots, and that's not what I'm looking for. This next one, again, going back to what Maria said a little bit about the ratio of white of the eye to iris or pupil. I'm not a fan of this ratio. This ratio is too much for me. The eyes in general, you can kind of see here, the eyes take over the head in this character. And so that proportion is off for me. It's not what I want to do. It's cute and a fun cartoony character, but it's not what I'm looking for. The other thing about this, and we'll see this in a future one, I think coming up, is that they have made the highlight almost like a secondary pupil, right? This white part, whoops, let me get a bolder color so you can see. This white part in the center of the pupils, I think is supposed to represent highlights, right? Which in, say, this one, you see the highlights here on the sides. But they've put it smack dab in the middle, almost as if it's a secondary pupil. And I'm not a fan of that. I don't like white straight in the middle of a pupil. So that's something that I'm gonna try to avoid in my own default style. This next one here, the reason that it ended up on the no list is not because I don't like it, because I think that's got some really neat elements. One thing I really do like about this, whether I add it to my style or not, is if you look at the shadows and then these bottom highlights, uh, they've chosen some dramatically different colors for them, which I really appreciate. That's something that's really nice. Now, it's more of a color element, which we talk about in other live streams, but that's something that I do like. But in terms of just strictly the eyes, the reason this ended up on the no list is because these eyes are kind of this sort of shape and form, right? They've got it's a very elongated eye, and obviously we've got kind of the eyelashes and stuff. But this elongated eye is not something I'm necessarily looking for. And we see that in the one right next to it too. So we could hop over real quick and look at that one. This elongated eye is not something that I want to do, which is interesting because when I was younger, during that more anime phase that I was in, it was probably college days, which is many years ago now. But during those days, I did really want to do this sort of elongated eye. I was really drawn to it. So a lot of my characters had this sort of elongated eye. Those days are just gone. So I moved on and I'm trying to do something different there. In this one, again, we're talking about this sort of over complexity or this much more complex iris and uh, not necessarily pupil, but actually interestingly here, you see this highlight that's kind of at the bottom of the pupil. That's representative. That's what this artist did to represent that the pupil is a whole. Remember, I talked about that earlier. So that's just kind of their extra addition. Now, I like these eyes. They're very nice. They're very expressive. They have really nice detail work and they have a nice level of complexity. They're just more complex than I'm looking to do personally. It's just personally what I'm um, just not interested in that. This next set, why is this on here? I would imagine it's because the pupil is not a hole anymore. There's a pupil here in these eyes or pupils. You can kind of see it's this dark area in the middle here, but it's not dark enough to represent the pupils. So here what we have is almost all iris, and that's not what I'm interested in doing. It's not bad. It's not wrong. It's just I'm not necessarily interested in doing that. If I was going to do this piece as uh, if I was going to do this piece in the style that I'm more hoping for, I would probably do like the whole eye be one color instead of multiple colors, and it would be like an artistic decision that I made, if that makes sense, rather than kind of fake the pupil in this lighter version. I just don't think that that works all that well. I think that you need that definition of the pupil in there because if you don't have it, then you've ignored a substantial element of the eye, and I wouldn't want to do that. But it's a very pretty image. I really like that aspect of it. It's just not for me. This next one is similar in that sense because we've ignored the pupil entirely. Yeah, not a problem. But for me, these eyes, they feel dead. Like there's not a there's not enough contrast here to make me interested in looking at these eyes, and so it just doesn't do anything for me. So that would be something that I typically want to avoid. This one is very cute. The thing that I'm not a fan of, or not even not a fan of, because I think it works well for this piece, but it's not what I want to do, is this sort of shape of having this eyelash down at the bottom here, right? So having the eyelash down at the bottom, uh, not what I'm personally interested in doing. I would rather have this kind of definitive upper lid, and then whether or not we have a lower lid, um, even a lower lid with an eyelash attached to it, I could probably go either way with that. But don't. I'm not a fan of this combining the two and then having the eyelash be down here. It's just it doesn't work for me. It's not what I'm looking for in my own art. So I will avoid that. All right, a couple more. This one, oop, come on, iPad. This one is actually from FredTheMonkey.com character that I did way back in the day, Chloe, and her eyes were kind of anime inspired. But again, now that I've moved past that, it's that elongated shape again, which I'm not necessarily interested in doing. And the pupils are they're just a little too cartoony, and this would work in certain. I like how the one I just kind of did roughly is I could see my own progress by doing that. Anyway, it's just a little. It lends itself a little too much to a cartoony element that I'm hoping has hints of in my future style, the style I want to build, but it's not. This isn't what I'm looking for anymore. This isn't where I want to go. And the same goes for these two. These two are both also from previous characters of mine, and same character, just different designs for that character. And again, we have this very cartoony look, circles for eyes, circles for pupils. It's just not what I want to do anymore. I'm not interested in pursuing that, and so I just need to keep that in mind. This one, which again I think is very pretty, and I like I like a lot of aspects of this, but I think again this lends itself a little bit more towards this one, right? These two have a similar feel in a sense that they have that single color. We've lost the pupil to a degree, and so that's probably something that I'm not necessarily going to do in my own style. It might every once in a while, but I don't think I'd want that as a default. Maybe I will. Maybe I'd change my mind about that. I'm not sure. Zarko says hi, everyone, in the chat. Hey, Zarko. Good to have you. Thanks for jumping on to the live stream. All right, so we move down to this next one. Again, we kind of go back. Actually, these next two are good examples of that whole let's put a giant white spot in the middle of the eye. Not what I want to do. I don't like that. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'm not looking to do hyper realism here, but this kind of abandons reality a little too far for me. I don't. You're not going to get that giant white hole where the black hole should be. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm definitely going to try and avoid doing that. And then lastly, come on, iPad. Sorry, it's doing that thing where it doesn't want to respond to gestures. It's getting to be a little bit of a grumpy old iPad. Anyway, so this final one, again, it's not that I don't like these eyes. They're very pretty, and I appreciate a lot of aspects of them. But I think, again, because we've lost the pupil entirely and we've gone so light with the iris, that there's just not a lot of contrast there. And contrast is really your friend when it comes to art. And it's something that I want to incorporate a lot into my work going forward, because I've always, not always, but for a long time and in a lot of ways, I've been a bit afraid of contrast. In a sense, I've held back when it comes to things like color and contrast, because when you go bold, all the mistakes show up. And so I just need to keep that in my own mind so that when I'm doing things, I don't default back to playing it safe, because that's not going to help me grow as an artist. There are times when I might want to do something in pastels and make it very soft and pretty like that. But for the most part, what I'm trying to do with my style, where I'm trying to intentionally take it, is to use bolder colors, bolder tones, hues, things like that, so that there's more contrast and there's more energy and there's more visual interest. So those are my not the direction that I want to head. And so then we can talk about some of the direction that I would be more interested in heading. Now, as I said a couple times already, none of these are exactly what I want to do. They all have elements that I like, so I want to take what I can from them. But none of them are like, oh, that's exactly the eye that I would like to do for my future style. But these are a lot closer. So we'll start up in the corner here and we can just kind of run through them and talk a little about them. Okay, one thing that you'll note with a lot of these eyes, I think, yeah, I would say a lot of these eyes, is that they're looking to the side. or if they're looking ahead, the head is tilted so that the eyes are kind of definitely to one side. And I find that this happens a lot in the pieces that I'm drawn to. You have these characters kind of looking to the side rather than straight on. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ever have characters looking straight on, because there are some in here where the character is looking more straight on. But I am drawn to this idea of keeping the iris and the pupil to one side, because typically, and you'll read about this if you go check out that article series that Ferdinand did on eyes, typically when we're thinking, we tend to look up or down or to the side, and we tend to move our eyes in such a way that we're using that physical action to kind of motivate us to think in a way. We've changed our focus from whatever's directly in front of us to these thoughts that are somewhere else, and we're not focused on what's in front of us right now. We're kind of going into the past, or we're going into our imagination, or whatever it is. And so when you have the pupil and the iris to the side, when you have the character looking to a side or up or down, it's going to lend itself instantly to an idea that this character is alive and they're thinking. It's no longer just a still shot of like this almost not necessarily lifeless character, but this unthinking illustration that's just happening. And now we've added life, because this character is now looking in a direction, which means to us as human beings, because we do this, that the character is thinking. So that's something that I want to keep in mind. And I think that it's a useful thing for everybody to keep in mind, that when we move the eyes to the side, we're going to add a level of interest, a human element, because either that character is looking at something else, which adds a story element, or that character is thinking about something, which adds an internal element that makes it so that the character feels more alive. So in this first piece, and in a lot of pieces, we have this sort of eye to the side thing. Now, regarding this first piece, we have a pretty significantly heavy eyelid. Whoops. Let's open up a new one. Okay, so we have this a pretty significantly heavy upper eyelid, which is probably going to be what I put into my default style. And we have some significant eyelashes and stuff. One of the interesting things about this is it does have the bottom lid, or the definition of the bottom lid, attached to the upper part, right? So these two connect. And so we have that. If we could just take a moment and go down for a second, you'll see here that this character and this version of a style does not have that. So that's something to keep in mind, for me to keep in mind. Do I want that whole connection, right? Do I want it to be a little more complete like this? Or do I want it at the bottom here to be kind of, sorry, hard to draw accurately and talk at the same time. Do I want it to be disconnected so that we have the white of the eye just kind of being the defining line or the defining form? Or in this case, because there's the skin tone and the white of the eye is the same color because it's just a sketch, it's implied that it's the roundness of the eye. And so that's not something that I'm going to decide right this second, but I will say that I tend to lean more towards leaving some lineless areas there, but I don't know. We're gonna kind of find out as we go. But in terms of this upper eye, I do like the level of contrast. I like that there's this shadow. The pupil it's not overly complicated. Like it's not, but it's got gradient in it. It's definitely not quite as simplified. One thing that bothers me a little about this is the exterior of the pupil is pretty heavy. This line right here it's pretty heavy, and I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of how heavy that is. I think I would like this more if that line was not quite so heavy. If we could just paint that in for a second. Right. So if that line was not quite as heavy, and it won't be perfect because I think I like this more. Does that make sense? Hopefully, you guys get what I'm seeing there when I'm trying to explain that exterior line for the iris. I think I'd want to keep it thinner, but I do think that it needs to be there because if we took it out entirely, which again we kind of just keep painting over. And forgive me because it's going to be kind of messy. But if we took that out entirely and we didn't have an exterior line, it's going to change the feel of it a lot. And I'm not sure that that's what I'd want to go for in my own personal style. It's not bad. It's just that I think I like a little bit of line in there. And we talked about that in terms of the live streams on line quality and line weight, and also in our backgrounds lecture and live stream. In the event that you missed any of those live streams, I will say they are all on a playlist at Animator Island TV. So if you hop on over to YouTube and you check out youtube.com/Animator Island TV, or just search YouTube for Animator Island TV, you can find a playlist called, I think, Searching for Style. All of the live streams that deal with these issues and these explorations are there. So you can check those out if you'd like. And catch up on some of the previous episodes. Okay, so continuing along. In the second one, one last thing to say about this first one. We see that the eye is kind of this oval olive shape that stretches horizontally instead of vertically, right? And I mentioned that in some of the no's, right? In some of the no eyes, the main, not force, but the main thrust of the eye was definitely more vertical. And that is something that I am not as interested in including in my own work going forward. Although I do like that one. It's fun to it's been a long time since I just had fun drawing, but man, that's a fun eye to draw, just for fun. Okay, so we're saying no to that and yes to that. As far as the connection of the upper eyelid and the lower, I'm not sure yet. We have to still look at that and figure it out. Okay, this next one, it is just a very beautiful rough sketch. One thing about this one is that ratio that Maria talked about earlier between the iris and the white of the eye is pretty significant here. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily something I'd want to do, but here it works really well. But I think for a default, I probably wouldn't have the irises and pupil combination here because it's, well, yeah, pretty much it's combined. I don't think I'd have it quite so extreme. It's pretty massive. Let's look up this first one again real quick. What we have here is, okay, good. I put it on its own layer. Let me move my little draw over away for a second. What we have here is this portion of the eye, white of the eye, and this portion, which I could turn a different color real quick. The whole eye, ratio-wise, right, is kind of almost 1-1 to a degree. We have this sort of, there's even probably a little bit more white of the eye than there is iris and pupil. Whereas if we go down to this one, what we see is that the iris and pupil is kind of enormous compared to maybe this part, compared to the white part of the eye, which is significantly less. So the ratio here is very different. So I think in terms of ratio, I'm drawn more towards that one, right? And this one is the ratio feels a little off to me. It's too much pupil, it's too much iris for what I'm looking for in my own default. But having said that, move that out of the way. Having said that, there are elements of this that I really appreciate because it's got this elegant quality to it. The lines here are just nice and light and airy, right? This line work, the way that it just kind of flows. This artist, expressed a quality to these eyes that is soft and inviting, and I really appreciate. And so I really like that aspect. I'm not sure how I would get that into my own work, especially when I go back in and do inking and things. I think one of the reasons these eyes excel in the way they do is because they are so sketched out instead of highly detailed or that sort of thing. So I think one of the things that draws me to these eyes is that element of lightness and airiness that comes with the sketching process. Now, one other thing that I want to mention real quick, it's not the main focus of our piece today, but we do need to talk about it a little bit, is the eyebrows, right? Because they are kind of an element of the eye. They're another one of those secondary elements. You might call it a third tetrarium element. Anyway, so here I really like the eyebrows in that they are expressive and they're not just because this artist could have just made the eyebrows, kind of plain and boring, and the character wouldn't have the same feel and expression and life to it that these eyebrows lend to it. So that's something to keep in mind. I like the interplay between the eyes and the eyebrows. And we'll see that in some other pieces coming up here. Okay, this next one. I like this kind of dimensional quality. These eyes to me feel like they're recessed in the head, which I appreciate. It doesn't go quite as heavy extreme, right, on the upper lid. It does at the edge here, but in this first part of the curve, it doesn't even really have line. It's just allowing the skin tone and the iris to be the defining line. And so I like that. I appreciate that. And that's something that I want to keep in mind. I dig the shape of these eyes overall. We have this general shape that appeals to me and I like and appreciate. And I'll just trace it out real quick and then we can move it over so that we can see it more clearly. So this sort of shape is very pleasing to me. It's pleasant and I kind of like it. So that's something that I want to probably keep in mind. One thing that seems to be happening is that we have this sort of extra element at the end. Here it's very small on that one, but I do like kind of that eyelash coming back and off of the eye like this. On the flip side, you could have an eye that that does this, and then we have like actual lashes sort of things coming off like this, which we saw in some of the pieces that I said I didn't want to do. If we go back there real quick, like this one, right? We have these individual lashes that are popping off the eye, especially at the top here, like that one, and then this one down here. Those ones are just, it's a very different feel to this sort of idea of right at the edge. So that's something that I think I like this sort of having the eyelashes be an extension of this top line. So I'll probably incorporate that or try and incorporate that. So that's that. Okay. Okay. Maria has a bunch of things. Let me read real quick. Oh, George MacDonald. Love George MacDonald. Okay. Maria says, this is making me think of a description of a character in a fairy tale by 19th century author George MacDonald, a girl kept deliberately in the dark. Oh, interesting. I don't think I've read that one. I have to check it out. If you wouldn't mind, post whatever book you're talking about, because I think at this point I haven't read enough George MacDonald. I've read Princess and Goblin and Princess and Curdie, which I love. Like sometimes I'll just listen to those in audio format when going to bed. It's so much fun. Okay. Says the book is The Day Boy and the Night Girl. It's a good title. So continuing on, the main point in which was that she should never see any light but what came from the lamp, hence her octave nerves, and whoop. Indeed, her whole apparatus for seeing both grew larger and more sensitive. Her eyes indeed stopped short only of becoming too large. So yeah, George MacDonald is such a joy to read. Him and E. Nesbitt and of course C.S. Lewis, and there's a joy. But I would definitely have to check that out. But yeah, that's a great point. If a character was kept perpetually in the dark, they would have almost probably permanent extra large pupils, and their eyes would look very different. Which I think is fascinating. You know, you think about that sort of thing. You think about how our eyes have developed because we go in and out of light, but it's very different if we had changed the conditions that we live in. Um, we'd have very different apparatuses. And I think that's fun because as artists we can explore that, right? We could do a drawing of this character from The Day Boy and the Night Girl, where we have a character with these extra large eyes and pupils and things because of their situation. Really interesting stuff. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Okay, well, let's continue along. This next one down here, interestingly, this next one has the eyes that don't have a pupil again, right? Like, and we've talked about this, that wasn't necessarily something I wanted to do, but here I think it works really well. It adds this softness and lends this illustrative quality, and I like that for certain things. So that's something that I want to keep in mind. Just because the characters that I want to do as a default, the style that I'm trying to develop, is probably going to have pupils and irises, or if not both, then at least the pupil. That doesn't mean we can't occasionally play around with characters that just have irises because it kind of has a nice feel. One thing that I really love about this particular set of eyes, and forgive me because they're kind of blurry because I had to blow it up. But one thing I really like about this is that it's got that dimensional feel again. These feel like round eyes that are in the skull. These aren't just painted on the character, right? Some eyes feel like they're just on top. And, you know, sometimes that's okay if we're going for a very graphic look or something. But these eyes feel like they're part of the character, they're part of the skull. They're larger than I probably would want to draw eyes. Uh, there are aspects of this that I don't like, but I really like, for example, this upper line that defines kind of the eyelid. And that eyelid feels solid, right? This feels like a plane. This feels like it's wrapping around the eyeball. And I just super appreciate that the artist was able to capture that feeling. And that's something that I'm hoping that I can capture too. Um, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of practice because again, I'm used to drawing eyes that are just circles with some dots. Uh, but I think I can get there, you know, in time as I continue to practice and I continue to work on that aspect. But I do need to keep in mind that three-dimensional quality. So let me write that down. Uh, that's incorrect. Let's be down here more. So I do want to keep in mind that three-dimensional quality, that the eyelids wrap around the eye, right? Instead of just being flat, because it's just very easy for me to flatten things out. So something for me to keep in mind. Okay, this next set, I love how piercing these eyes are. Again, a lot of these eyes that we've looked at, not these next two, but a lot of them have kind of been looking out to the side, looking up, looking down. These ones are just spot on looking at you, but they feel alive still. They feel like piercing, the striking quality. And striking is a word that came up in other of these live streams and other analysis that I've been talking about. I want my art to be striking. So we'll put that again. This striking element. These eyes are very striking to me. They're substantially larger than some of the other ones that I've been discussing, but they don't feel overly large like some of the others. This feels like the pupils and the irises. Well, it's kind of a combination again of iris pupil. It feels like it fits this character. It feels like it fits her eyes. I really like that. Now, interestingly, this also has this sort of um, just eyelashes coming off, but it's not overdone. I'm still not sure I like it all that much. If we took those out real quick, right? If I just kind of painted over those for a second, This changes the feel, but I personally, this is again, it's just a personal thing. I dig this more than if we include those extra little lashes. Personally, is it as striking? Maybe not. It might not be as striking. It's still pretty striking, but it's not as striking. But I kind of like that a little bit more for my own default style. I could see that sometimes I would not put that in there. Maria mentions there's something about the angle of the irises meeting that's almost meeting each other, very different from the others. I think I assume you're talking about this one. Forgive me if you're talking about a different one. Then apologies, because sometimes the chat updates a little bit differently. The angle of the irises meeting. In this one, yeah, it's. Let me do a little tracing just so I can kind of analyze a little bit away from the rest of the piece. Give me 1 second, and then we'll take a look at this. Because yeah, I think that these particular irises are not necessarily straight circles or anything. So I think the downward slope of the eyelids, that angle and things do lend themselves into causing the irises to feel kind of convergent in a sense, which is nice. It's got a really interesting feel. And again, I think we're coming to this sort of shape, which we kind of came back to a little, or we kind of touched on a little bit before, right? We have this sort of shape again, and let me okay, zoom out. We have this shape that's kind of up with this shape. We have this similar. It's very similar. So this is a very appealing shape to me, and I'm liking it. So that's something that I do want to keep in mind going forward. It looks like that we've kind of settled a little bit on a particular shape that I keep being drawn back to. All right, this next one, it's the expressive quality of the eyes that drew me to it. Like a lot of these eyes are very pretty. They're very light and soft. These eyes are hard, and they are mad, and they are expressive. And I appreciate how much just emotion is in these eyes. Again, we have a different type of striking, but these are very striking eyes as well. Now we've reduced the size of the pupils, and we've reduced the size of the highlights and things so that we can lend itself to this expression, which is nice. You know, we change that size so that there's this hardness and the sharpness to it. But I really appreciate how expressive. Now we'll write that down. I appreciate how expressive these eyes are. And so that's an element that I'd really like to incorporate. Now, in terms of pupil size and ratio and things like that, these eyes are a little more cartoony than what I'm technically going for as a default. So I probably would, if I was doing the image, I would probably increase the size of the pupils a little bit. I think that would reduce the effect, right? Like this isn't as good now that I've done that. So when it comes time to draw some like particularly angry or frustrated character, I may need to reduce the size of the pupils and the iris. But as a default, I'm probably not going to draw a ton of angry characters. I'm not a very angry person, generally speaking, as long as I don't get set off by certain things. But so my characters are probably going to be more serene and peaceful and happy. All right, this next one, there's the eyes are closed, so we have that going on. But firstly, I love the shape here. I mean, this is just such an elegant shape. I can't even draw it; it's too elegant. Okay, there we go. This is just a beautiful lower eyelid closed shape, and then these just subtle upper lid definitions. It again, it lends itself to that dimensional quality. These eyes feel recessed. If we didn't have that, right? If we didn't have these at the top here, this whole thing feels very different. Um, it's it's not as good in my opinion. It's still beautiful, it's still nice, but we lose something because we've taken away that just touch, those touch, just hairlines of definition really add such a dimensional quality. And so I really appreciate that. Um, I found a lot of images. I didn't include a lot here, but I found a lot of images that I like with closed eyes. That doesn't help me to analyze eyes too much because I need to know what's on the inside. But apparently, that's something that I'm drawn to is this sense of just peace and serenity of a closed eye. All right, jumping up to the top here, we are coming up on an hour and 20 minutes, and we've got a significant number to go. I'm not sure how my iPad's doing on power, but hopefully we'll make it through. But I will speed up a little bit, and then we'll get to a Q&A in a bit. So again, if you have any questions either on eyes or art or animation or whatever, feel free to post them, and I will try and get to them in the Q&A, or you could save them for the Q&A. Okay, in this next set, I really like that the eyes are different in order to lead your eye and the expression quality. So in this piece, some not dry color. In this piece, we have kind of this this first eye is angled such that it's a pinch point that leads you in a certain direction, or it leads you back this direction. Either way, it's a very leading motion and eye. And then on the other eye, on the other side, we have it's much more elongated and it's so the whole angle kind of goes like this, right? We've got a direction and a sense of movement. And maybe that's another thing that I really like about having the pupil to the side or the iris to the side. By having it to the side, we're leading the eye of the audience. We're creating motion, we're creating movement even in a still image. And as animators, for those of us who are, that's something to keep in mind because we have an extra step that we can do because we can start the eye like over in the middle or somewhere, and then we can move it to the edge. And so then we're drawing both with where the iris and pupil are going and also with the actual movement itself in, four-dimensional time and space. But I really like that aspect. And these are very expressive eyes. You could just again, we have the similar with the eyebrows, right? We have them incorporated into the eye. This one is incorporated into the eye, and this one is also, it's coming up like this. And so we're mimicking again the sort of movement that's coming with this. And I really like that aspect of that movement. Okay. My throat's wearing out. Voice is starting to fade. All right, keep going though. This next one, I appreciate for a number of reasons. The quality of the painting in this one is something that I think I'm particularly drawn to. But if we look at the planar change, right, of this eye, the left one specifically, this highlight catching this upper eyelid is really nice. Especially when it comes into contrast with the lower lid slash shadow slash eyelashes. This jump of highlight is really, really pleasant, and it gives that again dimensional quality. It punches things up another level, and I really appreciate that. As far as the eye, the pupil and the iris, I also like those because they have a little bit of dimensional quality. They've got a little bit of gradient. They've got a little bit of a painterly style, but they're not over the top, right? This artist could have gone in and they just kept like pushing and tweaking and adding highlights and adding this and that and the other thing, and they could have just kept going and kept going and kept pushing, but they didn't. They were more reserved and they held back a little bit, but they still added a little bit of that light and shadow and differing colors and things. So I appreciate that. And that's so these eyes, if I did a character that had eyes like these, I would be pretty pleased. These feel nice to me. There's a little flatness to especially the bottom of them. The top feels very rounded and dimensional, but the bottom kind of flattens out a little bit. So there I would want to try and get a little bit more in there. But it's still really, really nice. This next one, if the iPad will respond, this one, the focus is almost on the eyebrows more than the eyes, right? Like the eyebrows really are what sell this piece. It's just heavy, and but the eyes are to the side. It's just simplified and nice. I really appreciate this one. I like the chunky quality of it. Um, this one is almost hard to separate from the rest of the piece in a way. Like obviously I've cut all these out of bigger pieces. This one's almost harder to separate because even with this nose here, we have this sort of dimensional quality and this plane change. Like you got this chunkiness in here that I can tell appeals to me. And so maybe that's what's drawing me to this one more than the actual eyes themselves. But it feels very cohesive, and I really appreciate that. These eyes are just pleasant. Like it's very interesting because they're very different shapes in a sense. Um, these the drawings that these come from are very appealing to me. These eyes kind of have a Disney quality to them if you think about it, or to me they do anyway. They feel a little bit Disney-esque in a sense. And since I grew up with that stuff, I'm gonna probably always be drawn to it to a degree. Whether I want to pursue that as my own art style, I don't know. But these eyes are very appealing. They have expressive qualities to them. They feel like I want to talk to that character. It's very just pleasant. These are just very pleasant eyes. Um, and continuing along, these next two are by the same artist, I'm pretty sure. And I think what's interesting here is that they've kind of abandoned the bottom line what's entirely, right? And interestingly, the iris and pupils are going to be different in both of them because this one has a really uh, large pupil and smaller, or well, large pupil and large iris, but also the pupil is taking up a tremendous amount of room, and the top one is much smaller. And this is so of these two, I lean more towards this bottom one when it comes to ratios of pupil to iris because I don't like how this one is just this kind of almost snake eye or cat eye, whereas this one, whoops, that has more substantial pupil, I tend to like a little bit more. In different situations, you're going to get different. You're going to need to do different things, but that's just kind of what pops into my head. Also, if you note this very subtle extra line here, adds a lot. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to make a note of that. That subtle eyelid. So that's something that appeals to me, and we've seen that in a couple of different other ones too. This piece, you've seen this in other live streams. If you've been to the other live streams, this is one of my. I just really like this piece. But I think again, we're kind of going with dimensional quality that I really like about it. This eyelid feels thick. It feels solid. It feels like this eye is three-dimensional and it's in the skull. And just this change of plane, and you can't really see it because it's too dark. I change that to this. This change of plane here with the eye and where it's placed makes everything feel very dimensional, and I love that dimensional quality. Oops, this is supposed to be an S. Spelling. I think it's an S. Oh man, technology has ruined me. I used to be able to spell and now I can't. But this dimensional quality is really lovely, and I just appreciate that in that one. All right, we're gonna buzz through these last ones pretty quickly because I think they're going to kind of reiterate some of the things we've already talked about. This one is nice because the bottom lid is kind of part of the cheek here. We're getting this kind of element of a cheek coming up and raising up to get this kind of squint in, this smile with the eyes that I really appreciate. So I kind of like that aspect of it. This next one down here, we have absolutely gorgeous shape and quality, and oh man, these eyes are just very pretty to me. Um, and this one, the way it wraps around and this just the flow of it is really just lovely. But again, we're getting to this shape again, right? I'm pretty sure the shape is just going to be repeating this shape and this shape. So we found, at the very least, we have found a shape that I'm going to be drawn towards and want to incorporate. This is the shape that I'm really a fan of, clearly. But these eyes are just so simple and nice and beautiful and just lovely and inviting. And again, they look to the side, so you got that thinking element. This one, again, we have this nice element of movement with everything just feels drawn to lead your eye. It's got a really nice quality, and you want to know what's coming, or you want to know what this character is looking at or what they're thinking about. It adds that story element. It's really nice. I don't like these hash marks on these eyes. Um, it's or I shouldn't say I don't like them. I don't want to do that. That's not what I'm looking to do. But I do appreciate uh, the quality of the how do I want to put it, the shape, that kind of thing. Like this shape again is coming up in these eyes, and I like that it starts at thin here and then ends with that thicker kind of element. I'll keep those lines there. Um, so this sort of quality, this sort of shape uh, in line and in form appeals to me because it's got that movement to it. It's got that quality that's just I really appreciate that. So those are kind of what I'm doing or what I was looking at there. Uh, I don't know what I was thinking with this one. It's nice. I'm not sure why I put this one in here. Same with the one below it. These two, I'm not, and it might just be because I am now analyzed so much that I'm starting to get burned out. My brain is not going to be as sharp at this stage of analyzing than it is earlier. That's why you can only analyze so much. After a while, you need to take a break, and so I could feel myself at that point. We're at an hour and a half in, and I could feel myself at that point. There are things to think about in this eye or this set of eyes, but my brain isn't clicking with exactly what it is that I was putting them in for or why I was interested in them. So I'll have to come back to it, I guess, because thankfully they're the last two, so I'm not. But I will put here. Okay, so in terms of these, I will have to take a break and come back because I am not quite as sharp as I was when we started this whole thing. I can feel that it's enough. I've hit my limit of analysis for one session. I need to take a pause and then come back and reevaluate like those last two and just kind of recap later on. But for now, we can kind of wrap this section up by talking a little bit about what we learned. And what I learned regarding my own style and what I want to try and do related to eyes, we can kind of go through them. We've found that there's a particular shape I'm drawn to. It's this kind of um, slightly angled oval olive shape that I really dig. So that keeps coming back through. We found that, as Maria mentioned, the ratio between eye white and pupil or iris or both is really important. I don't want to go super heavy on the iris and pupil. I'd like to keep that balance, feeling a little more, I guess, balanced, have a more, not necessarily more eye white, but probably a little bit more eye white than pupil. I don't want to go super heavy on pupil and iris. The top lid, I like having that shape that draws this movement, this feel of line weight and quality. Really appreciate that. And so I think that all those things are gonna lend themselves well, and we'll be able to start doing some eyes and start honing whatever it is that I want to have for my own personal style. and should be good. All right, that's going to conclude the analysis portion of our live stream. I'm going to do a pretty short question and answer, just because my throat is already starting to be scratchy. But if you have a question and you would like to chat about anything that we've talked about today, or uh, anything related to animation or art or life in general, all that stuff, feel free to ask now, and we'll cover a few things. One thing that I've noticed, interestingly, as we continue this process, is that in the beginning, in the early live streams that we've done now on Mondays at 10 a.m. Eastern, there were a lot of questions, right? And then a lot of them got answered. And as we're working through these things together, I'm finding that I'm anticipating questions and trying to incorporate them into the lectures. So, in a sense, I'm kind of glad that that a lot of people are getting their questions answered as we're going. But again, if you have questions, you're more than welcome to ask away in this live stream or one of the others. I will mention though that um, in terms of next live streams, I'm probably going to be doing another live stream this week. It won't be in this series. I'm going to be just doing some gesture drawing because I did one of those recently, which again you can find at Animator Island TV, where I just sat down and did some live gesture drawing from reference from photographs and things. But I'm going to probably do another one of those this week because I need to keep working on my gestures anyway, and I feel like might as well invite everybody to join in. So if you're interested in doing some gesture drawing or seeing it done, feel free to keep an eye on the Twitter handle, keep an eye on Facebook, keep an eye on YouTube, and you can check that out when the time comes. And if you want to join in, absolutely grab a sketchbook or open up your favorite art program and we'll draw together because the images will be up on the screen. So it's a good opportunity. It's a good jumping off point for you to do some drawing and things like that. So that's, I think, about everything today. If nobody has any particular questions, I was kind of rambling a little bit just to make sure that the chat caught up with the video stream. But if nobody has any particular questions, we'll wrap up. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming. Maria, specifically, I appreciate the insights that you pointed out. And I'm going to, after I close this window, go reserve the Day Boy and the Night Girl from the library website, because that sounds like a good one. And I'm always a fan to read some more George MacDonald. That's about it for me today. Thanks so much for stopping by. Thanks for chatting, everybody. And we'll catch you next time. At the very least, we'll be definitely next Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern time, but then also an impromptu live stream later this week doing some gesture drawing. So, all right. See everybody later, and thanks for stopping by.